Hey guys, Tammy here. And this week I want to talk about how co parenting with a narcissist is exhausting. Now, I know a lot of you are dealing with this issue, and I hear this over and over about how people are just drained. And this is one of the posts in one of my groups that I run is really what kind of inspired this episode. And somebody posted and said that they were just so drained that they feel like they can't live their life because that person, that narcissist, is controlling every aspect of their lives and it just feels non functional. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. If you're watching me on YouTube, don't forget to hit like on this video and also subscribe to the channel so you get notified as new videos are released each week. Here's the thing about this is yes, it's exhausting. Yes, we're dealing with a lot of attack from the other person and manipulation and the bullying. But your very first line of defense is your own self. Here's what I mean. What the narcissist uses to be able to manipulate you and to be able to keep you in this exhausted state is fear. They implement that fear through a myriad of tactics, including gaslighting, their manipulation, overstepping your boundaries, attacking you, attacking your self esteem, attacking your self worth. All of these techniques are all things designed to keep you in a state of fear. Again, there's a lot of words you could plug in there, right? Anxiety, stress, whatever that word is that comes up for you. But I think for a lot of us, it is fear-based. What that means is that they are keeping you in this state because you're much easier to manipulate that way. Let's face it, a person that's fearful or anxious or stressed or feels unworthy or feels insecure, much easier person to control and manipulate than somebody that's coming from a place of confidence and self-worth and assertiveness. And so the very first piece of this to understand is that you are living in a state of fear because of the things that are coming from this person. And here's the beauty of this. You don't have to. You living in a state of fear in some ways is a choice. So the first thing that I usually tell people to do is make a decision. Make a decision, a conscious choice that you are not going to allow this person to have this kind of power over you in your life. Now, I'm not saying just making a decision will solve all your problems. There are, of course, things that you have to follow through on, and we'll talk about that as we progress in the episode. But the very first piece of it starts with deciding that you aren't going to let this person intrude into your life in this way. When you talk about this in the context of child custody and in regard to your fear, if I'm focused on this other person's behaviors and the fear that they are actually trying actively to get me to focus on, if that's working and I allow that, then guess what I'm not focusing on? I'm not focusing on the positives of my interaction with my child. I'm not focusing on the positives of the fact that I got out of this relationship and that I can recreate my life in the way I want, whether that's a new relationship, a new healthy relationship, or something else. I can focus on my career. I can focus on making my home environment a pleasant, comfortable environment. But you can't focus on any of those things if you're allowing this person to drag you down into that fear. And so your very first line of defense is that you have to make a decision that you are going to be intentional about not letting your brain go there. The next the next step that I usually tell people to do is ignore them. Now, if you have not had this experience of dealing with a narcissist, I will tell you that ignoring them is the one thing that will absolutely drive them insane because they thrive on that attention. And they thrive on that attention, whether it's positive or negative. During the relationship, it's usually positive attention. once the relationship breaks down, a lot of times it's negative attention, but it's still attention. And so the only way to really cut that off is to completely ignore them. But here's what happens when you ignore them, they ramp up. So their efforts to engage you in the conflict and to try to manipulate you and to pull you back down into that state of fear will increase. Their efforts will increase. And so you have to be prepared for that going in and knowing that this is going to happen, because otherwise you're going to try to ignore them and try to ignore their craziness and their gaslighting and all those kinds of things. And then as they start to increase their effort and get more threatening and more dramatic in what they're threatening, it's going to cause you to collapse into that fear again. And you're going to be right back at the starting point. So the next thing that I think is really important for you to do, and, this really comes from starting to actually be out of the relationship and starting to try to heal and to really recognize all of the power and all of the control that you handed over to this person. What you want to do is take back control of your life. And I know for a lot of us, we turned over that control because we didn't want to fight about it, right? Again, it's exhausting. Co-parenting with them is exhausting, and also being in a relationship with them is exhausting. And sometimes you get to the point where you just don't want to fight anymore. And so you're kind of like, whatever, I'm going to pick my battles. I'm not going to fight over smaller issues. And so little by little, you just relinquish those little bits of yourself. And pretty soon, the life you're living is sort of like a puppet on a string where they're sort of controlling everything. Well, if you've taken the steps to cut those strings, then guess what? You're now the one in control. Now, I know if you're in a co-parenting relationship, you probably have court orders. You have certain things that you have to follow. So I'm not saying that you can just ignore court orders and do anything you want. You have to follow, the correct, you always want to follow the correct orders of the court, because you can get in hot water for that. But I'm talking about in the context of your own life, your own time, when your children aren't there, and when your ex is trying to overstep those boundaries and dictate how you should live your life, how you should parent your kids, how you should conduct things in your own home. That's not for them to decide. That's for you to decide. We don't want to engage in that battle. That's not what being assertive or having confidence is. Being assertive and having confidence is, I'm not even going to engage in this with you. You can't create fear in me through this. I'm not going to allow you to have this power in my life and to manipulate me, not through me, not through the kids, not in any of those forms. And that is really where we start to take our boundaries, our power back. So the next thing, as you can see, my brain was already going there, is boundaries, right? And I talk about boundaries a lot. And boundaries are very critical to your healing, your peace in your own world. And honestly, it's important for your kids too, because they need you to model boundaries and the appropriate way of setting boundaries. Now, let me say this about boundaries. One of the things that this doesn't mean is lack of cooperation. And I run into this a lot because a lot of people feel like, well, if I give them an inch, they take a mile, right? I mean, I think that's a common thing that we all feel about narcissists. And so you have to be careful that you're not just saying no, again, out of fear of a boundary being crossed, or out of a fear of that they're going to use it to manipulate in some way. In the court's eyes, we don't want to be doing what they're doing. We want to be behaving well and let them behave poorly, so that it creates that contrast of the two situations. Sometimes arguing back and forth with them is the thing that will be the most exhausting for you, is just trying to constantly fight with them, So we need to pick our battles and decide what are the important things to fight about and what are not. The next thing that you can do is challenge them. When they say something that you know isn't true, if it's something that you have some way of having them provide that, ask them for it. It doesn't mean that you have to come back and keep asking for it if they don't produce it. If they don't produce it, especially if you're on a parenting app like Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents or App Close or whatever it is, if you're on one of those apps and they say something and you ask them to produce it and then they don't, that in and of itself is it probably never existed. If you had to present that message to the court's going to assume that person wasn't able to produce it or they would have. Actually call them on what they're alleging. Again, if you have the ability to do that. Sometimes it's something a little squishier and there's nothing that you can really ask for. But if they say something like, oh, the teacher said blah, 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 blah. Okay, did you get an email from her or did she tell you that in person? Or how was that information relayed to you? And a lot of times, even just asking that kind of question, even if they don't have something, they will just not answer because they don't want to start boxing themselves into a corner with their story. The last one, and this is honestly one of the most important ones, even though it's last, this is not an order of importance. I would say just say no. Now, this might seem very elementary in a lot of ways. And if you've been out of the relationship for a while and you have gotten further down the road, this particular one may not be as much of an issue for you. But if you've just come out of this relationship, then this one is going to be critical for you. And when I say just say no, again, I don't mean in regards to custody, co-parenting, trying to be flexible or whatever in the first instance. I think in those times, you have to try to work together and try to cooperate as much as you can. But when I'm saying no, here's what I mean. A lot of times when we first come out of these relationships, we are still able to be emotionally manipulated. And this is why the non-communication and drawing those boundaries is so important, because then it doesn't even put you in a position where you have to say yes or no to something. But if you have an instance where something kind of gets through the cracks and they ask you to do something for them that benefits them, that doesn't have anything to do with the child, it's the relationship between the two of you, you say no. So I hope some of the things that I've shared in this episode will help you accomplish that same thing. If you'd like some support and you'd like to learn more about my coaching services, please go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's a link on there. You can book a free strategy session with me, and I'd love to talk to you and learn more about how I might be able to support you. Thanks for joining me. I'll see y'all next week.